The one thing we told ourselves was we don't want to be the reason that this incredibly new technology, incredibly powerful technology doesn't get adopted. So we being legal said, no stop signs, right? But we're just going to put some guidelines in place. Come talk to us if you see anything great in your field that you want to use. Let's make sure we do the same checks, IP ownership. Let's make sure we're not exposing our IP to the wrong people. Someone is monitoring your data usage. Someone understands how model testing is supposed to work. There's real documentation about who is using what, and the tools are approved. So I think if you put all those three together, I think you can build a really good framework.
AI is moving fast, so fast that many companies are still treating it like a technology experiment rather than a governance issue. But what happens when AI begins shaping hiring decisions, influencing strategy, or exposing sensitive data? That's when the conversation moves beyond the IT department and into the boardroom. In today's episode, we explore how organizations should be thinking about AI oversight today, before the risks, regulations, and competitive pressures fully collide. My guest helps us examine the tension between innovation and control, and why leaders, especially CFOs, may be uniquely positioned to keep companies moving quickly while still protecting the enterprise. Enjoy our episode. Hello. Akin Adekeye is with us, a technology general counsel, MBA, and former software engineer. He was spent 2 decades advising founder-led and private equity-backed companies on governance, risk, and growth. Akin is also an active member of the L-Suite, a peer community for general counsels and chief legal officers. Akin, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is a wonderful topic for us, so we were looking forward to discussing it with you, Akin. From your perspective, when does AI move from an IT initiative to a true board level governance issue?
Yeah, it's I know everyone says that when they come on these shows, but it really is a good question. So I'm going to start out by saying great question. So for me, I feel like AI becomes a board issue the moment it affects enterprise risk, capital allocation, strategic competitiveness. If your competitors in whatever sector you're playing in are all over it, you better be all over it, right? And if you don't know what's going on within your company and you sit on the board, that's also not good enough. I know the audience is mostly CFOs, right after the CEO, probably the most important execs in the C-suite. So they need to know what's going on. The way I would look at it, look at the AI question is, think about where we were 10 years ago with cybersecurity, right? Where everyone's talking about it. Today, you can't even imagine a time when cybersecurity was not part of your regular cadence as an executive, and I believe this is where we're going, with AI as well. The only difference being, I don't think we're going to count the time in years with AI. I think more than likely we'll be counting in months because things are happening so fast, so quickly. So for me, the 3 signals that CFOs should really watch for, your material decision making, when AI starts influencing the decisions you're making on hiring, on what tools you're using. It might be time to make this a board level conversation. When you have regulatory exposure, I don't know if you've heard the joke that, innovation comes from the US, regulation from Europe, and then whatever happens in the US is copied elsewhere. I'm not going to name where elsewhere is, but right now there isn't a consensus on how we regulate AI. But I don't think it's always going to be this way. And when you think about, pretty much every company has some kind of nexus to, customers, consumers outside the US. So even if it's not regulated in the US, if Europe is regulating, we have to know what's going on in Europe as well. So because of the regulatory exposure, I feel, CFOs they have to know what's going on that front as well. And with capital deployment, if you're going to spend money on these tools, then that also needs to be a board level conversation.
Yeah. So what are the questions we hear board members asking management about AI today? And maybe what are the questions they aren't asking but should be?
So you probably heard of the term shadow IT, right? So you have your chief information officer or chief technology officer, depending on how you're set up, wanting to get a grip on, what technology is being used around the organization. But you have, I'm going to call out marketing here. You have marketing with 200 different tools that nobody knows about, so we used to call that shadow IT. Now in 2026, we have shadow AI, so the company is using something firm-wide, but different pockets of, departments and individuals are going off and doing their own thing, using tools that no one has really approved. So shadow AI is everywhere. Your employees are using ChatGPT, they're using Copilot, they're using Gemini, whether you know it or not. And I think boards often would underestimate, how much this is happening. And then, like I said earlier, what decisions are being influenced by AI? I think this is critical for accountability. If you're using AI in hiring, even in whittling down your list of resumes from the thousands to a more manageable, maybe hundreds, that's something the board should know about as well. And then what data is being exposed to external models, that no one's talking about within your org. And then, of course, we have to talk about, as great as AI is, there are still some failure patterns. There's hallucinations that could happen. We've heard about this. As a lawyer, there's been some embarrassing situations where lawyers have used AI to write briefs. They've gone to court. They didn't check their briefs. AI, has snuck in fake cases that really don't exist. And judges take a really dim view of that kind of behavior. If your paralegal did that in the old days, pre-2023, you might say, hey, my paralegal did that, but it's on you as the lawyer to check your paralegal. So now your paralegal is an AI. Your junior associate is an AI as a legal person, as a lawyer. So it's the same situation here. If your AI is hallucinating, you need to know that. If there's bias within AI, you need to know that. And of course, enterprise security. If there's security risks, you need to know that. So this needs to be like an enterprise level, plan within your org, and not just having people go off and doing whatever they want to do with whatever tool, they feel like using on whatever day.
You use that example about resumes, being able to really filter through the resumes and bring the number down or what have you. What are the concerns there?
Yeah. So there's a few practical things that happen, right? One, you post something on LinkedIn, for example, right? I've seen this. And then before you know it, so you're trying to hire in the US, but you're getting resumes from Africa, you're getting resumes from Europe, you're getting resumes from India. How do you deal with that? So that's number one. Two, when you have, say you have a chief people officer, he or she is only one person. They can't be in 1,000 places at the same time. How do you really deal with 1,000 resumes for one role? And this is not an exaggeration. It could happen. So now what people do, they throw everything in AI you instruct the AI what you're looking for, and it could be extremely helpful, to pare that down to a more reasonable number. But the reality is you could miss some things, and we've seen, some AIs have biases, the same biases that exist in, regular society, these things were programmed by humans, and that could happen as well, discrimination, things like that. So that could happen as well.
Interesting. It could only just be one individual who typed out the criteria for thousands of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or plugged it in. What does then effective AI governance actually look like today? What is it? What's taking shape here? What is it?
So I think this is where we have to get really practical. Good AI governance has, I would say 3 layers. You need board oversight. And I know, again, depending on, what kind of companies your audience work for, that could be a fully formed board. For some people, it's VC-backed companies that may not have, the most formal board setup. But it doesn't really matter, right? As long as you have a board, you do know how to do oversight. This is something that should be part of, board oversight. If you have an audit committee, that could be what they do. If you have a risk committee, that could also be where you do it. And then secondly, you need executive ownership. Your CEO has to really embody this or it's not going to work. Your employees can see through performative, we're using AI for everything. But, when I asked you about this thing I'm trying to do, you're like, no, we don't do that. You didn't talk to the CIO. You didn't talk to the CTO. So they know when it's performative. They know when it's not real. So this has to be real. It has to be like any other firm-wide, endeavor. The CEO has to be bought in. CFO, obviously, because again, who has more insight than the CFO into what's really going on within the organization? If you have a chief information officer, certainly. If you have a CTO, certainly. And then, of course, the reason why we're here, the governance of it all. If you have a chief risk officer, if you have a general counsel, if you have compliance, all of those need to be involved. And then, where does your data reside? Do you know where your data is? Do you have a data map? Do you have, do you have data leadership? And what does that mean in your organization? And then I would say lastly, the actual operating controls that you need to put in. Your tools, make sure the tools you're using are approved. Do you have a process for approving those tools? When we started this, my last job, when Gen AI became a thing, the one thing we told ourselves was we don't want to be the reason, that this incredibly new technology, incredibly powerful technology doesn't get adopted. So we being legal said, no stop signs, right? But we're just going to put some guidelines in place, come talk to us. If you see anything, great in your field that you want to use, let's make sure we do the same checks, IP ownership. Let's make sure we're not exposing our IP to the wrong people. Someone is monitoring your data usage. Someone understands how model testing is supposed to work. There's real documentation about who is using what, and the tools are approved. So I think if you put all those 3 together, I think you can build a really good framework.
Do you find boards are more concerned about downside risk today, or are they increasingly worried about falling behind competitors? Seems like it's one or the other.
Another good question. I think increasingly worried about falling behind. It's really hard to be. So think about when when .com first happened, right? Everybody wanted to have a website. You didn't want to be the company without a web presence, right? Fast forward 20 years when everyone was in the cloud, right? And we made the transition from SaaS to the cloud. The same thing. You don't want to be left behind. So this is a concern right now. Now you're at a point where the question is being asked, what is going to happen to the SaaS model when, what is going to happen to the SaaS model when, AI, agentic is all the rage right now. So I think that is probably the bigger concern for the decision makers right now. If we don't do it, our competitor will do it. They'll steal a march on us. And then what happens? And then before you know it, you're out of business.
I would imagine for the CFO who's going to go before the board and try to frame the different AI related risks, is there a place the CFOs should begin? I would think operational and regulatory, but I know there's lots of areas they could.
Yeah. So the way I look at this, again, I try not to come at this purely from a legal point of view, but just from a smart exec point of view, right? And assuming CFOs are often the smartest people in the room, but for me, the biggest AI risk for many companies is not necessarily, or when I using it, is not, or we're using it poorly. It's we're not using it at all, right? Like you cannot at this stage in 2026 not be in the AI game. It's just not going to work out. It doesn't matter what your industry is. It doesn't matter who your customer is. Everyone's using it. Everyone's doing it. You need to get in there. So I love that you've already done some of the work for me. You mentioned operational risk, right? So, and, I'll give you examples of those, incorrect outputs, that's a risk, automation errors, that's a risk. You mentioned, regulatory risk. Again, we know there's upcoming AI regulations. Europe is ahead of the US right now. But when you think about, I think the greatest, predictor of what might happen in the future is what's happened in the past. So if you think about in other cases where maybe the federal regulators have not occupied the space, what have we seen in the US? California will jump in. So think about, with privacy laws, California has, close to European style regulation. Even though nationally we're not there yet, but increasingly other states are following what California is doing. So you need to start thinking about what the regulatory framework would look like in the AI space. And as goes California, we'll go Illinois, we'll go New Jersey, eventually New York. And before you know it, it's half the country. You throw in Colorado and then it's really half the country that you want to do business in. So that's something you need to think about. And like I said earlier, even if there's not a lot of movement in the next couple of years, on the regulatory side in the US, because a lot of our businesses are transnational, because a lot of businesses are international, you have to follow what's going on around the world anyway. So again, think about what's happened with privacy issues. Think about what's happened with, consumer protections. I think that's where AI regulations will go as well. And then depending on your sector, there might be, a sector specific risk, that I may not know about today. There's also reputational risk. As an attorney, I gave you that example of, showing up to court with, fake cases in your brief. I mean, that can go viral instantly. Same thing in whatever industry, if there's a big AI mistake, AI driven mistake, that could go viral. You could go viral for the wrong reasons. You don't want that. But we started this talking about strategic risk though. If your competitors are doing it and you're not doing it or you're not doing it well enough, you can fall behind and you definitely don't want that.
So let's talk about that because, do companies risk overcorrecting here? They're either moving too cautiously because of governance concerns or moving too quickly without, adequate oversight. So there's kind of this balance that needs to be achieved. And one would think the CFOs are sort of in the fight there.
Yeah. No, it's I talked earlier about, legal not being, not putting stop signs up, and stifling innovation. I don't think it's just legal. I think it's the C-suite in general, so there's a actual tension, a push and pull, if you will, between, innovation and, governance. You can overgovern, and it's not good. You can stifle innovation, and that's not good either. So too much governance, leads to slower innovation. You don't want that. Too little governance also leads to uncontrolled risk. You don't want that either. So what you want is to live in that balance between, hey, we need to move as fast as we can. We need to do everything, as well as we can with the information we have today. And I think CFOs are poised, to be in that role because they know how much everything costs. They know who is hiring for what role at what point, into the future. They know what's in the pipeline for your sales team. They know what's in the pipeline for your marketing team. They typically have a lot of discipline. They know how to measure things, and they know how to prioritize, So for me, I feel like with CFOs, what they need to watch out for to make sure they don't over-index is don't plan this for just the here and now, right? So save money today at the expense of planning for the next 2-3 years. So that would be the potential pitfall for a CFO. Like, hey, there's no money. We got to tighten the belts, whatever. But it's also important to think about where are we going in the next 3, 4, 5 years, so don't overregulate, don't overgovern, but also don't let it be too loosey-goosey, because all the problems we talked about before, may now follow you.
I'm thinking about the audit committee and just wondering whether we'll eventually see something similar to internal control frameworks. I mean, what roles perhaps should the audit committee play in AI oversight?
Yeah, I can see it. I can totally see. So I mentioned cybersecurity earlier. It's a real practice now, right? So you go to any of the, audit firms, for example, you can have your regular financial audit. They can also give you a team to do your cybersecurity audit. I don't think that was necessarily the case 15 years ago. You know what I mean? So I feel like AI is the next domino to fall, so to speak, right? So you have your financial controls, you have your cybersecurity, controls. Now you're going to have, AI controls. So I think the audit committee is the right place for this to develop, for this to be governed out of. And we already have a decent framework, between your CFO, your head of IT, or chief information officer, if you have one. You can develop AI risk frameworks. You can develop, model governance frameworks. You can develop, standards for data integrity. You can develop, CFOs needs to start thinking about, disclosure risks. Some investors want to know if you're using AI, how you're using AI, depending on what industry you're in. Some consumers want to know. And certainly if you're publicly traded, that's a whole, different game entirely. All the things you want to do, you need to disclose. So, eventually, again, I think with AI, we're not measuring in years like that, where I'm talking maybe 12 to 18 months. We'll see, AI control frameworks. We'll see, AI assurance processes. You'll see, firms with AI practices. If they're not ubiquitous today, they will be very soon.
Looking ahead, maybe 3 to 5 years, how do you expect board expectations around AI governance to evolve then? I think you've hinted and pointed the direction perhaps, and how should CFOs begin preparing today for what's just around the corner then?
Yeah, I think you're going to see, AI governance move from like a curiosity or to to real to just an expectation. So from a nice to have / oh, we must have this, to just something you just expect to be part of your governance cadence. Again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but just like all the things I mentioned, cybersecurity, all of that, I think the similar frameworks will apply. But I think in the next 3 to 5 years, I think AI governance frameworks will be formalized. There may be, maybe from industry to industry, there may be some, soft specialization, like, hey, if you're in manufacturing, this is what it might look like. If you're in IT, this is what it might look like. But there'll be some basic frameworks, around how you figure out AI governance. I also feel like board literacy will accelerate in the next 3 to 5 years, right? I think, again, if you go back to, .com, it was cool. It was, no, not cool, but it was almost acceptable to be like, oh, I don't know anything about this internet thing, right? And then within a couple of years, you couldn't say that anymore. Everybody was online. E-commerce was a thing. Everybody was doing everything online. I think right now, there's a lot of, ignorance, if I may use that word. In 3 to 5 years, that's not gonna be the case. You would expect, some level of fluency, with your board members, certainly with your executives who live in this thing day to day. And I think disclosure expectations will grow. Again, depending on whether you're public or not, that may look different than privately held, companies, but I think customers would begin to really demand more on the AI front. I was thinking about this example, when I was prepping for this. Think about the music industry, for example. So say, instead of licensing a Sam Cooke song for a commercial, you pay someone to use AI to mimic, the Sam Cooke sound. So what happens? What does his estate do? Do they sue? Do they say, oh yeah, that sounds like Sam Cooke. It's all good. You know what I mean? So like, how are these things going to evolve? Because there will be more and more of those kinds of conflicts, going forward. Like that genie is not going back in the bottle.
Well, Akin Adekeye, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me. This was fun.